So that's about $200 for an adult every month, and it's about $71 for a child, and that really helps a lot. That makes the whole thing what we call progressive. In other words, if you look at your television set in the lower left corner, you put your finger and you draw across the dust up to the upper right corner, that's the graph of the actual tax rate that people will pay under the fair tax because of the prebate. So it's a terrific concept. It's a whole lot better than a flat sales tax or a value-added tax in that regard. It untaxes the poor completely up to the poverty level, and then as a consequence, you'll pay, I could tell you what the tax rates are, the effective tax rates are you'll pay based on the amount of money that you spend. We can get to that if you like.
Well, sorry, let's say somebody makes $50,000 a year and they spend $40,000 a year.
Well, I don't have 40,000 in my little calculation ready for you, but here's
you give me a number then.
Sure. A person at $27,000 or below for a family of four pays no tax whatsoever. $27,000, no tax whatsoever. Person who's spending, he can make $1 billion, but if he's spending $55,000, his tax rate, overall tax rate, is 11%. So maybe that 40,000 person would be about 8 or 9 or 10%, somewhere in that neighborhood. And now he's paying 15, 25 just for income tax plus payroll tax of 15.3. Hey, not bad. And if we double how much he spends, 110,000, his tax rate, oh my gosh, it goes all the way up to 17%. So this is beautiful, George, and I'll tell you why this is possible if you can stand it. Because we not only get rid of the compliance costs, we get rid of the tax gap, and that's from the IRS itself. Ms. Olson, the ombudsman for the IRS, tells us there's a tax gap of about $3,000 per taxpayer, and that's just from the legal filers. Holy mackerel. The average taxpayer, there's no average, I realize that, but they calculate an average taxpayer pays $8,000 in taxes. But the tax gap itself, because of people who don't file honestly or forget to file, if you like, and so forth, it's about $3,000 a year, and that's coming out of your hide, George, and mine. And that's only one thing. We can go on. That's the tax gap. Then there's the underground economy.
All right, more to talk about with you, Bill, when we come back. Plus, we'll take phone calls. We'll get your views on the fair tax next on Coast to Coast AM. Well, next hour, Jay Widener joins us with his recent work with life after death and how it relates to ancient mysteries and also the fear of death. And when we come back, we'll take your phone calls and continue our discussion about the fair tax with Bill Spillane next on Coast to Coast AM. Bill, will the fair tax generate as much revenue as the current income tax?
Yes, sir. And the jargon for that is so-called revenue neutral. Now, there's a silly plan out there called a flat income tax, and that does not generate the same revenue that the present tax code brings in. So it's not revenue neutral, but the fair tax is revenue neutral.
And as we know, billions of dollars on drugs, illegal drugs, yet they continue, those drug dealers and those people who deal with those funds, they buy things and they're not being taxed.
Right.
They would be under the fair tax.
That's correct. It's not only that. We talked about the compliance loss to American taxpayers already. We did talk about the tax gap a little bit, about $3,000 per legitimate taxpayer. We haven't talked about the underground economy. You're getting into that now. And that's $1 to $2 trillion a year in the United States, not taxed. And so it's a huge load on the lawful taxpayer that the other people are getting the benefits of the United States and they're not paying any taxes. Then we have tax inefficiency, which the IRS and the Office of Management and Budget claims is a $300 billion to $800 billion a year, and that's a subject all in itself, and that's because people just scratch their heads and everything else trying to figure out how they should proceed because they want to be tax responsive. Instead of an economic decision that makes sense, they have to figure out how the taxes are going to nail them. So that costs a lot of money, and it goes ultimately to the consumer. So we're talking about a tremendous amount of loss of income to Americans as a result of higher prices because of all these factors. Compliance costs, tax gap, underground economy, tax efficiency. Holy smokes. It's
Bill,
terrible.
With the economy limping along, is this the time? Is this the time to change the federal tax system?
Oh, my gosh, more than ever. Look, we've been at this for a dozen years. And so often in the past, people said, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They don't realize it is really broken. But now it's really, really broken because a lot of people now are knocking on the door and saying, hey, what was that you were trying to tell me last year about fixing the tax code? Because people are now awake that we've been digging a ditch deeper and deeper and deeper, and we have to stop digging and we have to climb out of the ditch, and the fair tax helps us to do that. It helps us to stop exporting jobs. It helps to bring investment into the United States, and investment means jobs. So it's a tremendous remedy to an awful lot of our problems. It doesn't solve a lot of things. We don't fill potholes. We don't predict the weather, but we're fixing a tremendous problem in our system. It's the tax code, and that'll put money in people's pockets, and it'll help them get jobs, and it's just a beautiful thing. And I could talk for an hour on each one of these specific things. But, George, I could talk forever. It'll go in one person's ear and out the other. There are 3 books that we have. FairTax books, and then the website, fairtax.org. People have to go to the website, fairtax.org, look it up. With all the information there, you can get a PhD. There's $20 million worth of research there. And the first FairTax book was by Neil Bortz and the congressman who initially sponsored the bill, John Linder, and that was in 2005. And then there were so many lies about the FairTax, they wrote another book called FairTax The Truth by Bortz and Linder again. That was in 2008. And now, just out in the last couple of months, we have the FairTax Solution by Ken Hoagland, one of our leaders in the FairTax movement. And that's a small book, terrific. They're all available on Amazon.com and other things. And there are other books. There are books full of lies about the FairTax, too. There are a lot of folks who don't like this because we're goring their ox, George. They don't like it.
I had the honor of meeting Neil again. I've known him for years, but at the Radio Hall of Fame where he was inducted last year.
Terrific guy.
And
absolutely.
Let's take some calls. Let's go east of the Rockies, Highland Falls, New York. Steve, take it away.
Good evening, George, and you're on Colonel. It's an honor to speak to both of you, especially you, George. I'm a huge fan of yours, sir.
Thank you, Steve.
Colonel, no offense, I had never heard of this before, but you're impressing me each moment goes on. As somebody who's paid just under $14,000 in total taxes this year, I do make a decent living, but it is hard, when $14,000 of your hard-earned money goes out the window to what I call loopholes, right, and other kind of black holes. Mm-hmm. Programs that, honestly, up until the last few years when I started making a decent living, I'd never heard of. I'd actually like to see this program implemented and maybe given a 1 or 2 year trial run. However, what scares me is that, and maybe I'm wrong, and I'm not an economist. I'm in law enforcement. What scares me is maybe the special interest groups, maybe the lobbyists, or even what I think of them as, like the boogeymen, the people lying in the shadows, where all this money is going funneled into some black hole or into some special interest. If you implement this program, I mean, it sounds wonderful, and I agree with it wholeheartedly. Will it ever be allowed by the IRS, by the federal government, by the state governments? Because won't they be losing a big source of, I guess, their pork or their I guess the word I'm trying to say is pork, or they're kind of it's like an untapped resource.
They're perks, I guess.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm trying to say, sir. Yes.
Well, your misgivings are very, very well placed. Now, keep in mind, we're only talking about the so-called revenue, which is a polite name for tax proceeds. We're talking about the revenue side, and we're not talking about the spending side. And they can continue with their pork, which is unfortunate. We're not trying to fix that. Now, there's 2 ways that a congressperson can bring in campaign contributions. One is pork, that is getting a bridge built in his area or whatever, a post office, whatever the case may be. And the other is by tax preferences. If you're in, say, the peanut business, and you come in and say, golly, your taxes are killing me, and the congressman says, oh, gosh, I'm very busy. I've got a re-election coming up. And you say, oh, I know that. I've hired a lobbyist, and he's going to go to all your fundraisers, and I'm going to send you a check. And he says, what was that about the peanut business again? Tell me more about your problem. You get it? Okay, so we're going to fix that. Away goes all the, we call them tax preferences, a little more jargon for you. All that goes away, and they have to be honest about that. That doesn't mean that they won't use pork and earmarks and so forth on the other side, but at least we'll be freed up some energy to look into that, okay? So you're absolutely right. There are all kinds of special interests, and they just crawl around the place